Hey everybody, and welcome to Dominion Cards, the video series where we take a strategic, in-depth look at various cards from the board game Dominion. This is a very special video for Dominion Cards because this is the 100th episode of this series, which is crazy. When I first started making this series, I rather presumptuously put 3 digits in all of the video titles and the thumbnails, thinking, yeah, I don't know, maybe I'll get to 100 videos, and it's been the better part of 2 years, but I actually did finally get there in the end. So, what better card, I thought, to celebrate 100th episode than to go over King's Court, a very, very famous and well-known card from Prosperity. So, King's Court, 7-cost action card from Prosperity, and it says, you may play an action card from your hand 3 times. So, it should be clear straight away, this is just like Throne Room from the base game, but instead of playing the card twice, place it in extra time. And of course, it costs 7, whereas Throne Room costs 4. Now, I've done a video on Throne Room, I think it's video 24. There's a lot of information in that video, it's quite a long one. There's a lot to say about Throne Room and Throne Room variants, and I highly recommend that you watch that video. I would like instead for this video to focus on what makes King's Court unique rather than just rehashing all of the same advice that generically applies to all Throne Room variants. So Throne Room is already known to be a particularly strong card. It's very, very good. And now King's Court gives you an extra play, and how good is that extra play? Well, it actually makes a massive difference. King's Court is astronomically powerful card, like unbelievable power comes from King's Court. Personally, I rank this the #1 strongest kingdom card in all of Dominion. Now, if you want to count like landscapes as well as just cards, then I would say that Donate beats this out. That's in Empires, and it's just ludicrously stupid event, that is. But if we're not counting the landscapes, then I would say King's Court wins. Very, very ridiculously strong. And to be fair, throughout pretty much most of its lifetime, King's Court has sort of been agreed by everyone to basically be on top. There's usually some quibbling about the top position, but pretty much like King's Court, it's just insane, basically. So, normally, if you want to play multiple copies of cards, you're going to need to buy villages. I call this the terminal tax. Like, if you want to be playing, 2 monuments in a turn, then you're going to need to invest in a village as well in order to get that extra play. Now, something I talked about in the Throne Room video is how efficient Throne Room is, and that is because when it plays the other action cards, you're not paying extra actions for that. It only costs you 1 action in total. So when you gain a Throne Room, it's a little bit like gaining an extra copy of a card and also its accompanying village at the same time. I mean, the analogy obviously breaks down under certain conditions, but, sometimes it helps to think of it like that. You're getting a card and a village at once. Now, of course, King's Court giving you the extra play is even more efficient in this regard. It's like you're gaining 2 copies of a card and 2 villages as well at the same time. So already that's going to sound like a pretty good value that you're getting from King's Court. So it's very action efficient, which is great if you're building an engine. But it's actually even better than that. So if you wanted to, say, play 3 monuments, well, you've got to draw those 3 monuments, right? They take up like 3 slots in your hand. But if you just King's Court a monument instead, then that's only using up 2 card spaces in your hand. So in addition to getting like the 2 extra plus actions from like the equivalent of getting the villages, you're also going to be getting +1 card as well. Now, you're not necessarily actually getting +1 card, but, not having to draw the extra copy of a card is sort of equivalent to having a bit more card draw. And in fact, this might be more clear if we think about if you play King's Court on a do-nothing cantrip like Pearl Diver. Cantrip being a card that gives you +1 card, +1 action. So if I start my turn, 5-card hand, and I've got a King's Court and a Pearl Diver in it, and I play the King's Court, and then I play the Pearl Diver 3 times, then what I end up with is 3 actions, because, I got 3 from the Pearl Diver, but I also have a 6-card hand, right? 2 cards came out of my hand, the King's Court and the Pearl Diver, so went down to 3, and then I got the +1 card on Pearl Diver 3 times, and now I'm at 6. So what this means is that cantrips actually kind of act like draw cards when you're using King's Court. Now, this isn't true with other Throne variants. Like with Throne Room, if I throw in a Pearl Diver, I'm back to a 5-card hand where I started. But with King's Court, even these very weak basic cards that you sometimes see a lot of, cantrips are pretty common, they can now draw you your deck across a number of stop cards. So even if you have to play King's Court on a weak cantrip, your engine is off. You've got 3 actions, you've drawn quite a bit of cards as well. Your hand size is bigger, which means, you're getting somewhere drawing your deck. So King's Court's very, very good at being able to basically draw your deck. You just get flooded with a load of actions, and it draws you a little bit as well, no matter really what you king. But, instead of thinking about using King's Court to king weak cantrips, what about when you use King's Court to play the strongest card in your deck 3 times? And let's be real here, what's the strongest card going to be? Well, it's probably going to be another copy of King's Court, being the number 1 strongest card in the game. Well, when you do that, what happens now is that you get to play 3 action cards from your hand 3 times each. And that's a total of 9 on-play effects for essentially only 5 cards. Right? If I have my hand of King's Court, Monument, 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 I'm getting 9 points, but I only had 5 cards in hand. And this sort of highlights another really important aspect of King's Court that's not true of most throne room variants, but it is of King's Court. And that is that you get more plays out of cards than you were actually able to gain. So if you think about throning a monument, for example, you get 2 points, right? You gained a throne room, you gained a monument, you play them together. That was 2 useful effects out of 2 cards. But with King's Court, you're getting 3 useful effects out of 2 cards. Where did that other monument came from, right? Well, it was sort of King's Court that did it, right? So even if the deck isn't actually going to be very good at gaining lots of cards, King's Court, while it's not a gainer, it is actually equivalently boosting your deck by a rate that's like gaining more cards, basically, right? Your output is going up really strong without actually having to gain that many cards. So all of this combines to make King's Court a really unbelievably efficient all-in-one package, right? You're just so easy to play. Action cards, you don't really need to invest as much in villages. You're easy to draw your deck, even if you're adding in just basic cantrips. You're getting huge amounts of plays without actually having to gain lots of copies of cards. Just phenomenal, right? Adding a King's Court to your deck is just an extreme boost to your deck's power. And of course, once you've got a King's Court, each successive one that you add, you might be able to king that King's Court. And now instead of being able to play 1 other card 3 times, you get to add 3 other cards instead, right? Well, yeah, so if you have 2 King's Courts, you get to play 2 action cards 3 times, but if you play the King's Courts on each other, then you get 3 instead. So, so that's like double the value that you would have got from a King's Court on its own. So King's Court is just a ridiculous accelerator to your deck. It's not uncommon with King's Court around to see that people have got these turns which are fairly mediocre, right? They're like, play an action card, trash a card, play a bunch of money, buy 1 card, right? The usual start of the game stuff. And then all of a sudden, the decks just go absolutely haywire. And that is because, you add in King's Court and suddenly the whole deck explodes, phenomenal, because it's the equivalent of gaining and being able to play just so many cards all at once without having to build as much of that support network behind it. Normally you want a deck to do really well. You've got to be buying the villages, you've got to be buying the draw, you've got to be getting the money and all that from somewhere. But King's Court, just you add it into your deck and boom, suddenly you've got all of this engine support added straight away and potentially lots of extra payload as well. Of course, King's Court, it costs 7, right? You're paying 7 for that power, which is quite a lot of money, actually. There aren't really that many cards that cost 7 or more in the game. But consider what you're actually getting from King's Court, right? 2 copies of an extra card, plus 2 villages, plus an extra card draw as well, equivalent of 7 and 1 buy for that is actually a bargain. In many ways, King's Court, it's actually too cheap. Right? This is what makes it such a ridiculously strong card. Just phenomenal efficiency for your money. And of course, by being very expensive, King's Court as well gives you something to do if you get an early high value turn. So sometimes, like, if you just spike 8 or 9 or 7 or whatever, you think, I really wish I had some plus buy. So you might like invest in some plus buy early. You don't necessarily have to do that straight away with King's Court, because if you do get that massive money value, you just spend it on a King's Court to make up all or most of the money that you got, right? Just very, very efficient use of that, and lets you focus on getting the other things, the draw, the going, the trashing of cards. Like, focus on that instead, and then just start like throwing in King's Courts, and you got some like cantrips or whatever, and your deck suddenly gets very good. Now, I mentioned it a lot in the expand video, but of course, by costing 7, this has certain combos and does things just through the cost alone. So there are synergies like Upgrade, or your opponent's governors that effectively let to trash a card and gain one that costs 1 more. And 7 is an important price point for this because there's province at 8, right? So one notable one for King's Court in particular is Way of the Butterfly, where it's like return this card, gain 1, costing 1 more. And while that is something that you can do with all 7 cost cards, with King's Court in particular, it's pretty important because of the way that when you chain King's Courts, you still basically get 2 uses out of the one King's Court before you return it to the pile and turn it into a province. So as with something like Expand, you just have to give up on using an Expand 1 turn to turn it into a province. With King's Court, you're only losing like 1/3 of the value. You still actually get to play the King's Court twice and then turn it into a province. So, Way of the Butterfly it deletes provinces very quickly because you get still most of the power out of playing it on the turn, and you get to trade it in for a province as well. So I don't want to focus too much on this because we've talked about this before in another video, but it is worth noting 7 is a special value in Dominion. It means it enables a whole range of things. Normally there's that gap between 6 and 8, and this bridges that gap, basically. So one thing very important with King's Court, and this is basically true of all engines, in that it's fine to have cards that will draw you more, will give you more actions, but what's actually the point of the engine that you're building, right? What is the payload? This matters a lot for King's Court in particular because of the fact that King's Court is so expensive, and you're spending a lot of money in investing in order to buy King's Courts. So if you have a kingdom that's got no plus buy, it's got no gaining, it's got no alternative way of scoring, so all you're doing is like the best you can do is buy 1 province per turn, then is there really that much point in building a super efficient like draw engine? What if it takes too long and then you're just too far behind on provinces? So King's Court, you can sort of throw it into most engines, or pretty much any engine, and it'll be really good. But if you want to decide, what sort of decks should I be adding King's Court to? Is it ever skippable, right? Then yes, it is sometimes, and ultimately it's the same question as you would for any engine, which is what actually is the goal of the engine? What are you going to do? If you think of King's Court as basically the ultimate engine card, right, for drawing and payload and actions, then the question of should I get it is the same question that you ask before you think about building an engine in the first place. It is worth noting that King's Court is particularly strong if you have gainers, and reason for this is because King's Court, it makes it very easy to overdraw your deck because you're getting all this extra card draw and all these plays. And of course, if you play a gainer multiple times, you can gain a lot of cards, and then it's very easy to draw all of the cards that you just gained, right? If you are chaining a King's Court and your first play is like on an Ironworks and you gain 3 cards, and then your second play is like on a cantrip, then you've just drawn all of the cards that you gained, potentially, and you've still got a play of King's Court left, so you can play another one 3 times, and if you gained like another Ironworks, well, now you can get even 3 more cards, right? And just like, wow, there were 6 cards added to your deck very, very quickly. Now, sometimes the gainer can also gain more copies of King's Court, so like you might have cost reduction in play, right? If I had King's Courted a bridge earlier, then King's Courts now only cost 4, and that means that you can gain King's Courts with something like Ironworks or Workshop. And what that means is that when that can happen, King's Court can actually go into a loop, right? If you gain a Workshop a King's Court and like some sort of cantrip, and then you play a cantrip with King's Court to draw those 3 cards, well, you can just do it again. You play the King's Court, you play the Workshop, you gain a King's Court, a Workshop, and a cantrip, then you play the cantrip, and you draw those 3 cards, and you do it again, right? And what you can do is you just, loop until basically one of those piles runs out. So you can find that all of a sudden, like someone like connects their King's Courts, and all of the supply piles that matter, they're all just gone suddenly, right? All these gainers, all these King's Courts, boom, they just vanish, right? That's just the raw power of King's Court. So because King's Court benefits so much from actually colliding it with another King's Court, because it makes it like twice as valuable, basically, than playing them separately, it massively benefits from any form of reliability that helps you set this up. The impact is just unbelievably explosive, and if you can like consistently pair up your King's Courts, sometimes that's what wins you games. Right, like if someone just has those extra warehouses or something that they can use so that all of their King's Court plays are chained on each other, then like it can be very, very hard to catch up. Like just unbelievable value that they get from their deck. So think very, very carefully when buying King's Court. Like, is there anything I can do to help collide these cards together? It's usually worth the investment. There are 2 cards in particular that combo very, very strongly with King's Court, or at least like interact very, very strongly in a notable way, and I just wanted to mention them briefly. So number 1 is Bridge. King's Court and Bridge is what I like to call the Exodia of Dominion. So if that doesn't mean anything to you, there's a deck builder game, or it's a collectible card game more, I suppose. It's called Yu-Gi-Oh! And it's got 5 cards that make up what's called Exodia. And it's literally just, if you have these 5 cards in your hand, you immediately win the game, right? So if you have 5 cards in your hand that are 2 King's Courts and 3 Bridges, effectively you immediately win the game in Dominion. And the reason for that is because, play one's King's Court to king the other King's Court, and then play each bridge 3 times. Well, now every card costs 9 less, and you have 10 buys. And that means, especially in 2-player, you just immediately buy out the entire province pile, and you win. So Bridge, a lot of other cost reduction other than Bridge tends to have a while this is in play effect. So Highway and Bridge Troll are notable for only being while this is in play, while Bridge isn't. So this works with Bridge in a way that it doesn't work with other cost reduction. You can just, very, very quickly make every card 0. And of course, it's just giving you a ton of buys as well. Another card is Scheme. Scheme with King's Court is like the ultimate reliability card for King's Court. So again, Scheme is something that's not got a, while this is in play, below the line effect. It works for multiple plays. And what it lets you do is that at the end of the turn, you just get to pick out of the cards you've played, which ones go on top. So if you king a Scheme, you get to pick 3 action cards you played that turn to go on top of your deck during cleanup. And so what you do is you just put a King's Court, and a Scheme back on top of your deck. And this allows you to just immediately pair together your King's Courts. The first play goes on a Scheme, which sets it up again for next turn, and also draws you 3 cards and gives you a load of actions. So it's very good. And of course, you don't have to limit it to one Scheme. If you add in a second Scheme, well, now you can top deck multiple King's Courts, and also potentially put a terminal draw card in there and draw 9 cards immediately at the start of your turn. So just very, very reliable, very, very strong. And it's also worth noting that with just one Scheme, you're also sort of immune to militia because it's only 3 cards you need. King's Court, Scheme, and it's just those 3 on your deck. And then you just discard the other 2, whatever they were, if you get hit, and you're still off, right? Your turn is still you just immediately pair up King's Courts and then draw a bunch of cards. So, yeah, just a wild reliability that's just very, very strong, in particular with King's Court, because of how much you want to smash the King's Courts together, and it gives you enough plays to set that up. So the last thing I want to talk about with King's Court is I did just want to reiterate certain points that I would have mentioned in the Throne Room video that I just think are particularly important for King's Court. I know I said I didn't want to rehash, but I'm just going to make an exception for these 2. Throne Rooms generally anti-synergize slightly with cards that get their power from from in-play effects. So goons and highway are two really important ones. This is much more pronounced with King's Court because, of course, you're missing that effect even more times, right? It's not just, there's not just one play that doesn't get to take advantage of that effect. It's two extra plays that sort of miss that out. Also, throne room-like cards, if you play a duration card with like a throne room, then the throne room stays out as long as the duration card does in play. And so you can get your throne rooms like stuck in play. Well, it's very important because King's Court is basically, it costs you a lot, right? And you really want to be playing it much more. And it's very important to have more copies of King's Court so that you can like collide them together. You really, really want to avoid your King's Court staying in play if you can. So if you absolutely must be kinging duration cards like Wharf or Fishing Village or whatever, what you should try to do as much as you can is make sure that when you play them, it is the same King's Court that is playing like up to 3 of them at once. So if you play a King's Court on another King's Court, and then that second King's Court, the 3 cards it picks, they are all duration cards, then what happens is that only the one King's Court gets stuck in play for all 3 of those duration cards, and that means that your original King's Court, you get to have it back for next turn to use. So you lose so much more efficiency if your King's Court gets stuck in play, like multiple of them. So you really want to take advantage of this. Anyway, that's all I have to say about King's Court. So what we're going to do now is we are going to head over to the online client and we're going to generate some kingdoms that have King's Court forced in, and we're going to see what sort of impact that has. So here we have, there is trashing with Forge and Lookout. There's also Apothecary to forego, but I don't think we'll be doing that. I guess there's Transmute, but you would never transmute. Potion cards don't seem very useful on this board. Now, what are we going to do? Well, there's plus buy with Pawn. There's Treasury and Militia as money value from action cards. There is Lighthouse to protect against Militia. The only draw here is King's Courting a Treasury or a Pawn. And we do have, with Treasury and Militia, like we can get a lot of money with enough King's Courts. So we really want to be buying like Treasuries and King's Courts and some Pawns as well for money. And given that we get to build all the way up to Colony and Platinum levels, I think it's very important that we try and build. Now, I feel like Lookout is going to be better than saving up for Forge, because Forge is competing at 7 with King's Court, and honestly, I'd much rather add a King's Court. I'm not seeing great synergies for Forge to smash together into cards. Like, the only 4 cost is Militia, and do we want provinces that much when there's Colony? I would rather build all the way up to Colony, and for that I'm going to be like kinging Treasuries and Militias and so on. There is Lighthouse to protect against Militia, but I will probably still get Militia anyway, because, it's nice early on to try and stop someone hitting King's Court. And also, I can king it for a lot of money. I get 6 money when I play it on a King's Court. So even though there is Lighthouse, I think I'm opening Lookout Militia. I will start picking up Lighthouses soon, and I'm going to start trashing the deck, and eventually some silvers, make my way up to King's Court, get some treasuries on the way would be quite nice. I'm certainly buying treasury over gold if I hit 6. And eventually, with the power of like Lighthouse in play and treasuries top decked, and like a Militia and so on, we will eventually hit 7 to get a King's Court. And of course, the treasuries get top decked, so it's nice and easy to pair them up with King's Court potentially. And yeah, we should be off then. So definitely a King's Court board. We need to, don't forget to buy pawns at some point as well. So King's Court, very good. I think the King's Court engine is definitely going to beat anything else out. And as you see, although there was no typical draw card, the cantrips became draw cards because of King's Court. So here we have trashing with Sentry. There is Witch as an attack for junking. We have Possession. Is there plus buy? There is Herbalist. There's also Contraband, but it feels bad in the presence of like Herbalist. There's Merchant as a cantrip as well as Sentry. And there's also Witch as draw. There's also Golem as a village, but I feel like we can ignore that. However, I think possession is quite good. So what are we going to do on this kingdom? We are going to try and junk our opponent to death as quickly as we can. We really want sentry first, so I'm going to open double silver, like silver merchant or double silver, I guess, on a 3-4. And we're going to try and get to sentry, and then we're going to buy some witches, and really we want to try and hit King's Court. And once you do that, you can basically junk your opponent to death, and then you can probably eventually build up to like possession if you want to. How necessary is it? Well, of course, you can king possession, right? If you play King's Court on possession, you get 3 turns in a row and you basically win. So yeah, we're absolutely going to be buying possession. King's Court, eventually we buy possession, and we just play with our opponent's deck a lot. And then once we've done that, we can just get rid of the money in our deck. And it's going to be hard because the only trashing is sentry. But like if we can like get rid of the silvers, then like even the merchants don't necessarily do anything anymore. And then at that point, what's our opponent going to do? They can't do anything. We get at least 3 turns every time with their deck, or to their 1, and they just lose. So yeah, so King's Court, absolutely dominant, as it will probably be in every single board we look at here. Just very good. Even though we can junk our opponent's deck and make it rubbish, I'd still rather play with it 3 times using possession turns than our own. Right, so on this kingdom, we have... what is the trashing? It is apprentice and replace. Okay, that's fine. We have any cantrips for King's Court, like there's City, there's Familiar, there's Wishing Well. We've also got Courtyard for draw, and of course Apprentice. There's Royal Seal, but who cares? There is Apothecary. You know what? Trashing the coppers is pretty bad here. There's only Replace, which you can gain you Courtyards, to be fair, which is not that bad. And Lurker as well, which is pretty good. In fact, Lurker's very good because it gets you King's Courts very easily. I think Apothecary might be worthwhile here. And in fact, I would like Familiar anyway. Like, my opponent will be very unhappy with a bunch of curses in the deck because they're not great to get rid of here. So I'm going to open Potion and... Wishing Well, I guess, is probably the best one to get that draw up, like rather than silvers. And hopefully we start with a Familiar, but I would be okay with an Apothecary, and at some point we're going to get Lurkers. Now, the big problem with this deck is, although we can junk our opponent very quickly with King's Court and Familiar, and possibly even Replace can throw some curses out too, where's the plus buy? Well, the only plus buy comes from level 3 cities, which is actually not necessarily going to happen because you can only gain 1 card. Well, there is Replace, can gain a lot of stuff. Well, I mean, you've got King's Court Replace to gain cards. I'm just thinking, like, what's the engine going to do? Well, I think we have to do the engine because Familiar will destroy our opponent very fast. They get so many curses so quickly. Also, if they're not building an engine, they can't really do Lurker tricks as easily as we can. And, of course, it's worth noting, actually, just thinking about it, with King's Court and Lurker, we don't have to gain cards. We can just delete 3 from a supply pile. Like, we just trash 3 of a card, and we can actually empty piles very quickly that way. I did say I was opening Potion, but thinking about it, we can lurk these cards directly as well. We don't actually need a Potion here, but I think a Potion is fine. Like, honestly, and you can, like, replace it later on. Yeah, so I'd probably get the Potion anyway. I'm a little bit concerned. If I see my opponent open Lurker on turn 1, then I might get the Lurker on turn 2, like if I opened 4-3. Or something, like I might be able to respond. I probably don't want the Lurker straight away. It seems if you can like start trying to get draw up and find your Lurkers more quickly by opening like Wishing Well, Potion, getting through your deck, then you're able to like snipe cheeky Lurker plays if your opponent tries it. So, having said that, getting a King's Court and then King's Courting Lurker really early on is incredible value. So I think I want the Lurkers pretty fast. I think I open... Maybe I just have to open Lurker anyway instead of Wishing Well, thinking about it. Maybe I just go Potion Lurker. Or if I get 5-2, maybe I do, Replace Lurker or something. Maybe I still do that. Yeah, and then I can like replace coppers into lurkers or something. I think I actually have to go the lurkers very fast. So I think I open lurker. I've changed my mind. And that just helps you get to King's Court very, very easily. And yeah, there is still a reason to build an engine, even though the output is not great. Lurker is super strong, and piles just delete very quickly. You can just empty the game very, very fast here, like incredible speed, just incredible. Anyway, so yeah, King's Court, very, very good on this board. Here, what have we got? So we've got Masquerade and Trading Post to trash, and I guess our opponent's pirate ships. I don't know why you'd go for pirate ship here. We have Draw, there is Vault, and there is Familiar as a cantrip with King's Court, and there's Masquerade. Well, we're definitely... If we get a 5-2, do we open Trading Post to try and keep our money up to get King's Court earlier? Or do we still just get a Masquerade anyway and we're sad about it? I think if I hit 5-2, I go the Trading Post, but otherwise I'm clearly going Masquerade. Yeah, maybe the Trading Post is bad regardless, I don't know. There's Familiar again for lots of junking, which can be passed with Masquerade, but you still don't want to really be the recipient of that. Is it actually worth Familiar though, or is it just better to skip it? I think with King's Court throwing so much junk, you will actually slow down your opponent enough that it is worth trying to get Familiar. So I think I open Potion and Masquerade on the 4-3, and I use that to get Familiar, and then I'm just going to try and buy my way up to King's Court, and I'm going to stop along the way to get Vault and Goons, possibly even a gold, maybe not a Hoarder straight away, because I don't really want to be buying victory cards. And the ultimate output of this engine is, of course, a Goons engine. I'm going to be using King's Court as my main village instead of Shantytown, if I can at all help it. I'm going to be drawing with Familiar, Masquerade and Vault with King's Court, and then I'm just going to be playing a bunch of Goons, and I'm just going to be buying more stuff. The problem is that there's not very good cheap engine components. I don't really want that many Shantytowns. It's not a very good card in my deck. Having said that, I might be able to draw sometimes with Shantytown, but not really. I really want to be drawing with like Vault and getting Familiar as a village probably. So yeah, I think I really do want the Potion because I need a village. Realistically, I'm going to need something that gives plus actions, and the only choices are Shantytown and Familiar, and I really hate Shantytown here. So we are buying Familiar as a village, funnily enough, with King's Court. And yeah, this is a crazy Goons scoring. So we're going to use King's Court to get there, and we're just going to score ridiculous points with Goons eventually. Play as many as we can, get a thin deck, draw a bunch, play a lot of Goons. So we're going to ignore Pirate Ship in Mine completely, and we probably ignore Trading Post as well. And who knows, maybe we ignore Hoard as well while we're at it. So yeah, it is just get thin, junk your opponent, draw Goons. And we use King's Court to get there. So 4 out of 4 for King's Court so far, as expected really. Well, this one looks a bit nuts. So we got Sentry for trashing, so that's good. We've got plus buy with Council Room, so very easy to draw astronomical amounts of points. We even got Throne Room as well with King's Court, which is still good. You know what, I'd still add Throne Rooms to a King's Court board for sure. We've also got Smithy and Rabble for drawing. There is Mill as another actions along with Sentry. So our only village, we have to King's Court or Throne as our village. We have got Throne Room, so it's a little bit easier. There is Swindler, which is very annoying. But oh well, you just have to deal with it in this game. And it's worth noting that there is Monument, which can gain you astronomical amounts of points with King's Court. Like, if your goal is to try and king like 3 monuments per turn, that's a lot of points. I don't think Gardens is as good. I don't think you're easy to run a deck with a lot of plus buy in it. I would much rather be kinging monuments, play a Council Room with buy, and like buy 2 provinces as well. Like, that feels like the good ultimate outcome. And I got to Swindler my opponent a lot. Now, it's worth noting that King's Court is somewhat protected from Swindler at 7. Eventually, the King's Court might run out, and then it stinks. Otherwise, you've got to watch out because your 4-cost cards, of which a lot of them are very good, Throne Room, Smithy, Monument, Mill, they're all at risk of being turned into Gardens. Your Swindler's at risk of Silver. And your 5-cost cards, your Sentry, your Rabble, your Council Room, of course, they may turn into Duchies. So Swindler's very nasty here. Like, every card except King's Court is basically at risk of turning into a horrible, like, basically a worthless victory card. So we can king Swindler and we can just annihilate our opponent's deck. So what are we going to do? I think I'm opening Swindler and Mill, and that will help me reach Sentry very easily, and I'm going to try and get thin, and eventually I will be adding Throne Room, and I'll be adding Monument and Smithy, and just all the draw cards and all the stuff, and yeah, we just build from there. Anyway, King's Court, very, very powerful. You can't really ignore King's Court Monument here, but also King's Court Swindler as well, just destroys things. You can even set up victory cards. Well, actually no, thinking about it, Swindler anti-synergizes with Rabble. If we draw with Rabble, we're top decking like provinces, and then we're under estates, and then we're swindling them back into provinces and estates. We really don't want that. So I actually want to avoid Rabble here, and I would much rather be going for Smithy as well. And, you know, realistically, my opponent's going to want to try and trash their estates as soon as they can anyway. So Rabble, I think we ignore. But otherwise, yeah, there's a lot of these cards, except for Gardens, very, very good and makes for an excellent engine. So there you go. King's Court effectively just, yeah, very, very strong in every single deck where it shows up in. Unsurprisingly, you don't need much to build an engine with King's Court. Just a cantrip will do, which is normally not good enough. And yeah, like, you know, very, very powerful engines on every single one of these kingdoms. Even when normally the engine components there aren't great, King's Court makes every card powerful, basically just by playing it with King's Court. So, that was all. Thank you for watching, and I hope I'll see you next time. Goodbye.